All right, well, thanks for coming, y'all. It's good to see everybody. So, this all started around the Christmas season of 2021 when I sent my nieces a series of postcards detailing a road trip that my family had taken in the summer of 1976. I hit upon this idea of telling a story through a series of postcards. And it's something over the last 3 years I've sent over 400 postcards to friends and family, usually in series. I've sent postcards of my Starry Night theory through series of postcards using the postcards of the paintings in my theory. I actually sent a series of those to the curator at the Met, yada yada. So anyway, I've hit upon this idea of telling a story through a series of postcards. The first series that I sent to my nieces, it was a bicentennial tour. I've detailed it on my blog. It was a bicentennial tour. So coming up from South Carolina, we hit Williamsburg, DC. I have 3 brothers and my mom and her then boyfriend. Williamsburg, DC, Philadelphia, New York. We didn't go to Boston, but we did go over to Niagara Falls, and we came back down through Gettysburg, Harper's Ferry, Monticello. It was just a wonderful trip, and I wanted to, I got the idea of telling my nieces about it. Of course, their father was on the trip as well, but I got the idea of kind of like telling the story to my nieces through a series of postcards. So I bought vintage postcards for each stop along the way, and then on the back I wrote a little micro story about what we did there, usually with like a little personal detail as well. It was so much fun. They loved it, and then it occurred to me. Well, first I want to say that I got my first postcards from Staunton Antiques on Beverly Street, vintage postcards. And most of the first postcards I got were what are called linen postcards. This isn't really a lecture about postcards or about the history of postcards, but I have learned some things about postcards, obviously, over the last few years. Postcards really kind of started around the first decade of the 20th century, early 1900s. And the first postcards, basically for the first half of the 20th century, postcards, you guys probably know this, were linen postcards, hand-colored, quote-unquote, linen postcards. And then after basically after World War II, in the post-war era, the popular cards became chrome cards. We're called chrome cards. They're literally photographs, and the term comes from Kodachrome, Ektachrome, and so these are that's kind of like a little. So the first cards that I got for that series, and the first cards that I thought that I would start collecting, were linen cards, but I quickly kind of like fell in love with chrome cards. I got my first cards from Staunton Antiques, and then I found this dude up at the Factory Antique Mall in Verona who must have 10,000 postcards. I mean, it's just amazing. He's got bin after bin after bin after bin, and he's got them broken up into states. For Virginia, he's got them broken up into cities and landmarks and so forth. And so when I was going through his postcards, looking for postcards for the Bicentennial Tour series, I found some postcards, other postcards that I liked, and I just bought, to have. Charleston. I'm from South Carolina. I'm originally from a small town in South Carolina called Barnwell, and I just want to give you a quick pronunciation guide because it looks like it's pronounced Barnwell, but I'm going to be saying Barnwell all the time, so I want you to know what I'm saying. Also, you can tell when somebody's not from Hilton Head when they call it Hilton Head. It's Hilton Head, so I grew up in Barnwell. Went to high school in Hilton Head, so that's just kind of like a little bit of background. But anyway, so I had these cards, and after the Bicentennial Tour series that I gave to my nieces around Christmas, like I said, of 2021, in February of 2022, it occurred to me that these girls don't know anything about their Uncle Ned, from before the time that they were born. And so I thought, why don't I give them like a sort of postcard autobiography? Send them postcards, and I send the postcards like once every 3 or 4 days, and hopefully the USPS gets them there in sequence. But I just thought it would be fun, to tell them a little bit about my life, before they were, not that it's anything special, but they're my nieces, and they long after I'm gone, when they're telling crazy, stories about their crazy Uncle Ned, I'd like them to kind of like know, some of the stuff. And so it occurred to me to give them a sort of a postcard autobiography. The fun thing about these postcards is, the text on the back is very carefully composed. And it's fun too, because as you saw in the blog, some of the texts are really, they're long. You know what I mean? So you have to write small, and sometimes you're going over into the right-hand side. But it's fun to tell the story, get the story into that one little space. So I just want to share a little bit with you, just a little bit about the postcard autobiography, because that stretch of Church Street there, the Dock Street Theater on the left, this is downtown Charleston, historic Charleston. Dock Street Theater on the left, St. Philip's Church down the street. That block and a half of Church Street is basically ground zero of my adult life. When I graduated from high school in 1982, I'm not going to give you my whole history, but when I graduated from high school in 1982, in the summer of 82, I had no idea what I was going to do with myself. I had met a girl at camp. I went up to visit her, for the weekend from Hilton Head, and she and her parents were like, "So what are your plans?" And I was like, "I don't have any idea." And they were like, "Well, why don't you just stay with us, for a little while and just, see what happens." So gracious of them, just amazingly gracious. Lovely house south abroad. It was just a wonderful summer. And Catherine, my girlfriend, she goes, they're having auditions for The Sound of Music at the Dock Street. You should go down there. She knew I was a singer, and she was a thespian. So I went down there, auditioned for the role of Rolf. Guess what song I sang at the audition? Anybody want to guess?
16 going on 17.
Starry, starry night. Believe it or not, and this was long before I became like the Van Gogh fanatic that I am. But I sang Vincent by Don McLean, and I got the role, and played the part, and did sing 16 going on 17 at the Dock Street Theater at the age of 18, and she was 16 going on 17, and Charleston ain't New York, obviously, but I really felt like I was on my way. I always wanted to be an entertainer, and I really felt like I was on my way. The Dock Street Theater is one of the most famous theaters in the country, and Spoleto had already been established there. Spoleto Festival USA, the arts festival. So many of the chamber concerts happened at the Dock Street Theater, and so forth. And one of my nieces is a singer, and wants to be a rock star, and the other one's an art historian. So I was like, these girls need to know about this part of my story. And so I sent them a postcard autobiography, about I think 12 or 13 cards over the course of about a month and a half, detailing some of my experiences in Charleston, at UVA. I lived in New York for a little while, and so that was the second series, the postcard autobiography. I actually sent them a second postcard autobiography later that summer. So then in April, I was like, you know what I want? I want like the official Museum of Modern Art postcard for the Starry Night. And because I've been there before many times, but I went online. Museums don't sell postcards online. There's just nothing in it for them, right? It's just not enough. But one day I woke up from my nap and my brain was like, eBay, dummy. Went on eBay, found Starry Night postcards, and then that April also I was watching the Heritage Golf Tournament on television, and I was reminded of Hilton Head, Harbor Town, and I was like, man, I bet I could find some really cool vintage postcards of Harbortown on eBay as well. I mean, just again, this is the last little bit of like, personal background, but Hilton Head was developed in the late 1960s and just exploded. Well, it didn't explode, but I mean, in the 1970s, we had this world-class resort in our backyard in South Carolina, in the middle of nowhere, and it came out of nothing. Hilton Head was almost completely uninhabited. That's a whole another story, actually. But in the early 1970s, I was a kid. We went to Harbortown. We went to the Heritage every year. We went to Hilton Head to vacation and so forth. And we felt like, I was a little kid. We felt like Harbortown was like our own. And it's just about the coolest place in the world. You see the famous lighthouse, the red and white striped lighthouse there. The basin is so cool. Anyway, so I found this card on eBay. And then I kept looking for cards, obviously. Searched for Hilton Head postcards, South Carolina postcards, what have you. And I found this one. And this is St. Luke's Church on Hilton Head. This is actually my church. This is the church that I went to. My aunt still goes there, St. Luke's Church. But my thought was, why would anybody want a postcard of, St. Luke's Church? It's not like it's a historic church. You know what I mean? It just seems just a little mundane. And then I saw this card. This is the entrance to Shipyard Plantation. Now, the gated communities in Hilton Head are called plantations. That's obviously something that's problematic. And I think they've stopped calling them plantations. And I could talk bad about Shipyard because we lived in Shipyard. Shipyard's a nice gated community, but it ain't Sea Pines. Sea Pines is the gold standard at Hilton Head. Harbortown is in Sea Pines. And I thought, why would anybody want a postcard? Not even of the Marriott at Shipyard, or of the beaches at Shipyard, or the golf courses, or the tennis courts, but of the entrance to Shipyard. It just seemed like humorously mundane, right? So I sent this postcard. I sent the postcard of St. Luke's to my aunt, who still lives in Hilton Head, and a dear friend of mine from high school who still lives in Hilton Head. Kind of like starting series to them. I didn't realize how far I was going to go, but I sent these postcards to them. And then the kicker was this one. This is what we call the new bridge to Hilton Head. It's the new bridge. It was built in 1982, but it's newer than the old bridge. It was actually going up when I was in high school. And again, why would anybody want a postcard of this plain concrete bridge, not even any kind of interesting angle or composition or something like that? This is when I finally started recognizing that these postcards were all by the same person. Turns out they were by a man named Ernest Ferguson. And so I sent this postcard to my aunt and my friend from high school. And on the back I wrote, "This Ernest Ferguson certainly had an eye for the mundane." Right? I said, still, all man-made objects are works of art. And from an archaeological point of view, this may turn out to be a valuable record of a representative artifact of the 20th century. So I was kind of needling him a little bit, being a little ironic there. But I really kind of almost started to think about this man as like a 20th century South Carolina equivalent of the French photographer Eugène Auger. Anybody ever heard of Eugène Auger? A-T-G-E-T is his last name, Auger. He's kind of noted now, for the quote-unquote beauty of his photographs. But in the day, he was just a documentary photographer, taking pictures of Paris in the late 19th, early 20th century. And of course, they're valuable records now because they show what the streets of Paris looked like at a certain time. So I was starting to think about, trying to give Ernest Ferguson a little bit more cred, even if he wasn't like a great artist with a great eye, he at least maybe he had some kind of archaeological or art historical or historical impact for his pictures. Then one day I woke up from my nap and my brain was like, you know what? So back in December, January, when I was buying those postcards from the dude up in Verona, I found a couple of cards that even then I thought were kind of humorously mundane. The top one, I'll have to say, doesn't appear to me to be as mundane now as it did the first time. Part of my bias was that is Edisto Gardens in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And if you grew up in Barnwell, you really had a lot of disdain for Orangeburg. You know what I mean? So as a kid, so this was on me. But I thought, why would anybody want a postcard of Edisto Gardens in Orangeburg? And then the bottom one is the Naval Hospital in outside of Beaufort, in between Beaufort and Paris Island. And I bought these cards long before, months before, you know, I even had an idea who Ernest Ferguson was, or had an idea where this was all going to go. But I had bought these cards previously for their mundanity. That's a word. And one day, you know, like I said, I woke up from my nap and my brain was like, I bet those cards are Ernest Ferguson. And I went and I looked for them. I got them out of my collection. I looked on the back of them, and they're Ernest Ferguson's. And then a couple more days later, it occurred to me, I was like, I wonder if the Church Street and Battery postcards are Ernest Ferguson's. Now, these I'd already mailed to my nieces, and so, but I make photocopies of every postcard that I send. I mean, I've got folders now of the over 400 postcards that I've sent to my friends and family, because it's an art project and I wanted a record of it, you know. And so I went and I looked at those pictures, and yes, indeed, they were by Ernest Ferguson. Photography by Ernest Ferguson, along Church Street, East or High Battery. So now at this point, I mean, I'm searching for Ernest Ferguson. I'm like, I want to find out more about this guy. And it's fun because you go on eBay, you enter in South Carolina postcard on eBay, you'll get 53,000 results. And I didn't go through all of them, but I went through scroll through page after page after page. And the fun thing is, you know, maybe as an artist or an art historian, it gets to the point where, you know, you might actually, I got to the point where I felt like I could see, because what you see on the main page, on the list page, the results page, is just the obverse of the card, just the front of the card. You have to click on it to see if they've scanned the back. But so as I'm scrolling through, it gets to the point where you're like, I bet that's a Ferguson, I bet that's a Ferguson, I bet that's a Ferguson. And I started to find some nice looking cards. You know? So there's the old bridge. Right? And it's still, you know, utilitarian, right? But it's got a little bit of character. That's the old bridge the Hilton had. But the composition, you know, first of all, the color, the green and blue, that's my color. Those are my colors. And the palmetto trees and everything, so nice composition. And the bottom one there, to this day, is absolutely one of my favorite Ferguson images. That's Trinity Church in Ridgeland, South Carolina. Which is just outside of Hilton Head, and just absolutely gorgeous, I think. The azaleas, the Spanish moss, the dappled sunlight on the facade of the church, just gorgeous. And that sandy ground there obviously brings back a lot of memories for me as well. So I started to find some nice looking cards, and I started to have a little bit more respect for my man Ernest Ferguson, and I started to recognize some common themes in his works. And one of those was historic churches. So you had Trinity Church in Ridgeland, and then this is Old Sheldon Church. Has anybody ever seen this church or heard of this church? This is one of the great landmarks of South Carolina, 1750s. Have you seen it? You know it? Yeah, isn't it fantastic? It's out in the middle of nice. Perfect place to go sketching. That's great. Let's talk about that. But it's in the middle of nowhere. It's outside of Beaufort. It's actually closer to Yemassee, South Carolina, which is basically a train depot. But my father, as his father had before him, made sure that we as kids were aware of this remarkable landmark in our backyard. So whenever we drove to Beaufort or Hilton Head or Fripp Island or what have you, we'd always stop on the way and stop at Sheldon Church. It's out in the middle of nowhere.
Do those columns stand alone?
And those columns stand alone. The church was burned twice. It was built in the 1750s by William Bull. It was burned by the British. They rebuilt it, and then it was burned by Sherman. And they didn't rebuild it after that. But one of the great landmarks of South Carolina, Old Sheldon Church. And that, of course, is like that's like the iconic view of the church. So Ferguson has that down. There's St. Philip's again now on the left in Charleston. That's John C. Calhoun's mausoleum there, or sarcophagus, and St. Michael's. These are basically the two kind of like flagship Episcopal churches in downtown Charleston, St. Philip's and St. Michael's. And this also, again, gives you an idea of something else I learned about postcards. There are two sizes of postcards. There's what's called the standard size, and that's 3.5 by 5 inches. And there's what's called continental, and that's 4 by 6. And you see those scallop edges too that you probably remember. One of the ways we date these photographs is by the cars, clearly from the 1960s there. But so anyway, recurring themes in Ferguson's work, historic churches. Here is Old St. Andrews outside of Charleston. And actually one of William Bull's, the guy that built Sheldon Church, his daughter Charlotta is buried in this church here. But this leads to another recurring theme in Ferguson's work, which is foreground flowers. He loved his foreground flowers. There's the State House. I love the fact that we call it the State House in South Carolina, not the state capitol. Some of the other states do as well, but most of them call it their capital. We call it the State House, and Ferguson was onto that. But there's some foreground flowers there, and you know, he could have backed up, I guess, to get the flowers, but I feel like he cut off the very top of the Capitol to get the flowers in. But it's kind of a good thing that he cut off the very top of the Capitol, because at that point, anybody know what was flying over that Capitol at that time? The Confederate battle flag was flying there. Yeah, so he hid that from history, probably unintentionally, yes.
And he happened to do the black church where that massacre was Mother or something.
I haven't found that. Mother Emanuel on Calhoun Street. Yep, that's an excellent question. He was an Episcopalian. He was a white man, Southerner, and most of his churches, every church we've seen so far is an Episcopal church. So excellent question. Foreground flowers. This is a house on Sullivan's Island, wildflowers. The cool thing about that house is it's underneath a mound of earth. I don't think it's there anymore. And then this is, talk about foreground flowers. I mean, it's like nothing but flowers, right? This is Ashley Hall School, the girls' school in Charleston, venerable, I would say, girls' school in Charleston. Catherine, my girlfriend that I lived with, went there. And Barbara Bush went there. Barbara Bush, Poppy's wife. And actually that summer of '82, I went to the commencement exercise at Ashley Hall because a lot of my friends were graduating that year. They were my age. And the commencement speaker was Madeline L'Engle. Wrinkle in Time? I don't remember what she said. I thought it was cool that she was famous. Foreground flowers. This is the Caroliniana Library at USC in Columbia, which is basically the Special Collections Library at USC. This library actually has 179 Ernest Ferguson postcards in its permanent collection. So if you weren't thinking that Ernest Ferguson was a serious artist, well, you know, la-di-da anyway. So I need to go down there actually and do some research on him. But again, the cars are fantastic. Anybody want to identify that car there? Anybody? I think it's a T-Bird. And of course, the ubiquitous car of the 1960s, right? Exactly, the Volkswagen Beetle or Bug, and that leads to another recurring theme in probably unintentional in Ferguson's work, and that is the green Beetle. I love this postcard. I just love. I'm a big fan of modernist architecture. Anyway, this building is a apartment building, Senate Plaza in Columbia, 1965. I love the way the building conforms to the format of the card. There's something about it that I like. The green beetle there. This is an old, I don't know if this is still there in Florence. It's called McLeod Infirmary, so I guess it's a hospital of sorts. And you have to look really closely down there on the street. Green beetle.
Is that his car?
That's the question, right?
There it is again.
And then Rainbow Road. Now I have to admit, maybe it's the colors, but the one at the Caroliniana, it looks more gray, right?
It looks great, but it
Yeah.
might be green. I don't know, it might be
And then that one kind of looks a little bit gray myself. So yeah, what are we thinking? This, we're thinking about Ernest Ferguson driving around South Carolina in his VW Beetle, taking
so cool.
pictures. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But evidently, somebody else felt like it was a drab-looking Beetle as well, because when they reissued this card, they retouched it.
Ooh.
So we used to play a car spotting game.
Garish.
We used to play a car spotting game when I was a kid called Spud, where you competed to be the first to call out Spud upon spotting a VW Beetle. Anybody else play a game like this?
We don't call it that.
And some people call it punch buggy.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm the youngest of 4 boys, so whenever we're driving to Columbia or Augusta or Charleston or Hilton Head, we played this car spotting game, Spud. And if you saw a red Beetle, that was a Spud Magoo, and it counted for 2 points. So when they reissued this card, they made the Beetle a Spud Magoo. And you can tell that they also retouched the facades of Rainbow Road as well. No question about it. His name there on the front of the card. Rainbow Road, of course, one of the great landmarks in downtown Charleston.
So which is truer to the colors you would see today?
That's a good question. I mean, I want to say this one because Charleston. It's an excellent question because first of all, look at this. So let's go back to the Battery real quick. One car.
Yeah.
Pretty impressed with that. I've got a picture of the Sunset Strip when I visited Los Angeles with no cars on it. And I'm like, because a lot of the times, most of the time, I've talked to Dwight about this before, sometimes like the main criterion for whether, the way we judge a work of art is how they do that. Like, especially a photograph. How do you get that picture? You know what I mean? Like Auger or Cartier-Bresson, right? All of his pictures are like, how did he get that picture? And so, how did he get a picture of the Battery with no cars on it, right? Now, the fact is, it wasn't until the 1980s and the 1990s that Charleston started to revitalize itself. And for most of the 20th century, Charleston, how many of y'all have been to Charleston? Yeah, Charleston is incredible today. Incredibly restored and lots of tourism, obviously. But throughout most of the 20th century, Charleston was proud but poor. And so Rainbow Row in the 60s probably did look a little bit like this, a little fairly drab. But now, today, those houses are worth, $3 or $4 million a piece, maybe even more, I don't know. And of course, there's the Board of Architectural Review, which makes you, keep them up. So probably this one, in terms of just like being, spruced up a bit. So on the question of reissues, there's a couple of interesting things. The Church Street card. So when he first issued the card, he wrote, I don't know if you can read it, the Dock Street Theater on the left, opened in 1736, is the first building in America designed solely for theatrical purposes and is still in use today. Well, evidently somebody from Charleston let him know. He was like, well, because the Dock Street Theater is famously like one of the first theaters in the United States in the colonial period. The first building, the original Dock Street was, supposedly like the first building built in the colonies expressly as a theater. But somebody told them, they were like, well, the original Dock Street Theater, yeah, that building dates from 1806. And it was a hotel, it was the Planters Hotel. And in the 1930s, during the WPA period, the hotel was closed. Again, like I said, downtown Charleston, not anywhere near the tourist mecca that it is today. So this was a derelict hotel, and the WPA, with the city of Charleston, restored it and made the interior of it a theater. And so when he reissued the card, he wrote, the present building represents a restoration of the old Planters Hotel. So anyway, I just think it's interesting. In coming across these cards, I noticed, I was like, those are different captions. And I have to assume that he wrote his own captions. Maybe his wife worked with him as well. And then the battery card, this one's a little bit more esoteric, but the first title of the battery card is East of High Battery. Well, this isn't East of High Battery, this is the High Battery. Or East Battery, that's East Battery Street. Going back this way, it's East Bay Street coming down the east side of Charleston. That's where Rainbow Row is. Rainbow Row is like a couple of blocks north of here on the east side of town, and that's on East Bay Street. But when it bends, when East Bay Street bends and goes down into the Field End Marsh area where the seawall is, East Bay Street turns into East Battery Street. Or they also call this section of town, this area, the High Battery. So it ain't east of High Battery, it's east or High Battery. And so when he reissued the card, he had the printers make some kind of patch on there to change the of to an or. Yeah, I guess you'd have to really look at the card closely to be convinced of my argument. But anyway, all of his cards, almost all of his cards were printed by Dexter Press in West Nyack, New York.
Are you saying he financed the issue of cards himself?
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
That was my question.
Absolutely, yeah. He was a businessman. His business was called Photo Arts. Photo Arts. So he thought it was art, right? In Winnsboro, South Carolina. I'll talk about this a little bit more later on. Winnsboro's up above Columbia, but no, this was his business. He made a living, bought a house, got married, had kids. So recurring themes of military bases. There's lots of postcards about of Fort Jackson around Columbia. This is, anybody want to guess where this is? Paris Island. And I just love this bottom postcard. Love it. Love the composition. I love those women in their shirtwaist dresses and their bleachers.
Gloves.
Gloves.
Yeah, you guys, the ladies with notice the gloves.
Gloves,
Right.
yeah.
That's the guide-on ceremony, presenting the colors. So anyway, recurring themes, back to recurring themes, military bases, small towns, small town main streets. I think there are two reasons why I'm drawn to this man's work. One of them is I used to drive around the Low Country taking pictures of old churches, right? Same thing he did. And the other reason I think I'm drawn to his work is because of nostalgia. Growing up in the post-war era, I was a teenager, I was a kid. I was born in '64, so I was a kid in the '70s. And these postcards, this is Batesburg, South Carolina, and this is Sumter, South Carolina. But they're microcosms, not microcosms, but they're records now of what these small towns looked like before Walmart killed them. All these small towns, especially in the Deep South, the downtown area is just dead. Walmart killed it. The factories moving away killed it. But there's Mac. We had a Mac's in Barnwell. My dad built it, not as the developer, but as the contractor. That was like Mecca for a 12-year-old boy. I mean, they had everything you need: models and record albums and goofy T-shirts and all that kind of stuff. So we had a Mac's. There's Western Auto there. There's a Cato, which is a discount clothing store. That's the Methodist church actually there at the end of the street. I'm thinking that it might actually even be Belt. Crest, S.H. Crest in Sumter. Love these cards. There's another VW, right? Unfortunately, there's the Carolina Theater in Sumter. But unfortunately, the pixels, I guess if you want to call them that, on the card, you can't actually see what was playing on the marquee. That would have been really wonderful to be able to date it almost exactly. But like I said, again, nostalgia for this period, I think. And I got this idea. This is tangential, but I got this idea of turning a small town like Barnwell or Batesburg. I think Sumter's doing okay, but turning one of these small towns, the center of the town, into a living museum, like Williamsburg. Instead of taking it back to colonial period, take it back to the post-war period. Restore this downtown area, restore the signage, and have people dressed in period clothing, working the soda shop, all this kind of stuff, and setting it up as a quote-unquote living museum. Because I mean, we did Williamsburg, brought Williamsburg back to life. What's that?
Rockefeller.
Yeah, Rockefeller, that's exactly right. So if anybody knows of any foundations that want to get involved in this, but I just, especially today, all these pictures kind of remind me of, make me think about, what I'm starting to think of as the before times. But even, even with the fact that the downtowns are dead and Walmart's killed them, I think there would be a nostalgia, to be able to go back and walk a city square like it was in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So that's another bright idea I've got in the hopper. One of my regrets with Ernest Ferguson is I haven't found downtown Barnwell. He's got some pictures of Barnwell. Barnwell has a famous vertical sundial in front of the courthouse. He's got pictures of that. But there's no pictures of the center of Barnwell is what we call the circle. And he doesn't have any pictures of the circle, and he doesn't have a picture. The Episcopal Church in Barnwell, I'm absolutely certain he was aware of it. But I haven't been able to find a picture. It's from the 1850s. It's a neo-Gothic, gorgeous little structure that I was christened in. And I haven't been able to find that one either. So those are my two biggest regrets, is that I haven't found cards for Barnwell.
Is there a list that exists of all the pictures he took?
I've got one. I've identified over 700 postcards.
You have.
Me personally.
But I wondered if somewhere there were records.
No,
Did he
this
keep
is deep
records?
groundbreaking research on this
Okay.
important artist that nobody's ever heard of. Thank
Awesome.
you. And so the couple of things I want to mention. Thank you for that question, Karen. This is kind of interesting. Here's an old linen postcard of Sumter, and it's like the exact same perspective. So you figure, he probably knew, the history of postcards, obviously, and you have to think that he probably took this picture as like an updated version of that one. And it's got a little green car in the left foreground as well. All that stuff's still there pretty much. I mean, Crest isn't there anymore, but that's the post office.
What did you say, Crest was?
Sumter. Crest, S.H. Crest was a 5 and dime.
Okay.
All the towns. You guys have them up here? All the towns in South Carolina, all the towns in the South.
Woolworths.
Yeah, Woolworths is big up here. But any town, any main street, Charleston's got one. The old S.H. Crest was one of the benefactors of the National Gallery. Samuel Crest, along with the Mellons and who else? A guy named can't remember. Anyway, there were like 3 or 4 millionaires who started the collection at the National Gallery in the 1930s. Crest was one of them. So if you go to the National Gallery, always look at on the text block for the painting. Look to see who when it was acquired, and it's either going to say Mellon or Crest or the other one. So S.H. Crest was a department store, and just about every town still has the S.H. Crest building. It's probably been turned into a Williams-Sonoma or something like that. Here's, in fact, this is Columbia, downtown Columbia. See the State House there at the very end. There's that building right there might be Crest. Crest's buildings were famous for like being Art Deco buildings, really gorgeous terracotta tiles on the facade and so forth. I'm going to run through these real quick. That's Folly Beach. Cool thing about this one is, sometime in the 1980s, they built a big Holiday Inn at the very end of the street, kind of blocking the view of the ocean And so you get this record of what Center Street on Folly looked like before that. This is obviously the 1950s or so, maybe early 60s. That building, those two buildings are still there, so still recognizable. Cooper River bridges. Again, that's actually leads to another recurring theme, which is Charleston. He was all over Charleston, I think about the way I like to characterize it is you talk about did he finance it and all this kind of stuff. You have to think that he was pulling off a pretty, what you might call a cheap trick, because he's going to all these towns, especially Batesburg and Sumter and so forth, and he's taking pictures of their stuff and selling it back to them, right? I got the term, of course, we've all heard of the band Cheap Trick, but I was listening to an interview with Pete Townsend of The Who one time, and they were asking him about how his band set the tone for fashion in the 60s. He was like, we were just looking at what the audience was wearing and wearing it ourselves and kind of giving it back to them, and then we got credit for the fashion. He goes, I'll never forget, he goes, it's a cheap trick, but it works. And of course, the best politicians are the ones who find out what people need and then sell it back to them as what they want. So obviously, I've gained a lot more respect for Ernest Ferguson and his enterprise. This picture, this is the Cooper River Bridge. This is the first Cooper River Bridge across the Cooper River from Charleston over to Mount Pleasant. Growing up in the country, I called it the Cooper River, but my girlfriend, her last name was actually Cooper, and every time I said Cooper, she said Cuppa. And I said Cooper, and she would say Cuppa. And now to this day, I can't help but say Cuppa. So the Cooper River Bridges, that's the first one. And this is one of the first cards where I was like, okay, is this like an arty card? It's kind of a neat composition, right? Interesting angle. Or maybe he had to take it from this angle to get the whole, bridge
The bridge itself is already.
in there. Yeah. Well, that's exactly. That's my next lecture. And then a couple of other. In the 1960s, they added a second bridge, the Grace Bridge, no, the Pyramid Bridge. That's the Grace Bridge. That's the Pyramid Bridge, and a couple of arty-looking photographs. So my whole idea of this guy as laughably mundane is completely gone now. Obviously, I have every bit of respect for him in the world. Thank you very much. That's mine. So there's the current bridge, the new bridge built in the early O's before they tore down the other bridges. Sullivan's Island Lighthouse. What are you doing? Sullivan's Island Lighthouse. Pretty card. That's the Calhoun Monument at Marion Square, which I'm happy to say they have taken down. Charleston.
Flowers.
Thank you very much. Drayton Hall, iconic view of Drayton Hall there. Peacocks at Middleton Plantation. And then this is really cool.
Actually, a person in that one.
Hey, that's right. Exactly. No people so far. So maybe that's a special person. Maybe. The cool thing about this picture is that's the old Charleston Museum. And when I moved to Charleston in the 80s, all that was left were those four columns, kind of like Sheldon Church. All that is left is those four columns. They still stand today, and this whole block now is a public park with the columns there, almost as like modern sculptures, standing in the middle of the park. But I had never seen this building. I always knew they were the columns for the old Charleston Museum, but I had never seen that building. This little brown patch there shows up on every iteration of this card, so it must have been some kind of flaw on the slide or something. The woman, I feel like, probably shows up again in this picture of Colonial Lake, which is just a couple blocks down Rutledge Avenue from the museum. Maybe it's the same day. I mean, if it's the same woman, I don't know. Brunette woman there in his picture.
Maybe she was traveling.
Right, exactly. Yeah, going on the road. Why not? Right. This one definitely falls in the mundane category, right? This is the interior of the then brand new municipal metropolitan, what's it called? The Columbia Airport. So there's another brunette lady. And then there's this picture.
Oh, gee.
So if this is his wife, I'm thinking she was a trooper. And can you imagine the conversation that happens before this picture
Oh, my gosh.
gets taken?
It'll take a second.
And she's like, exactly.
That's all I'm saying.
That's all, you know, it'll only take a second for this thing to bite the whole leg off.
Oh.
It's almost surreal, you know?
Yeah.
In fact, when I sent this one to my friend in high school, from high school, I wrote, Ferguson dabbles in surrealism. And this is actually kind of a rare card too. I've got a couple of other copies of it now, but
You talked to the other, you just couldn't have done this?
I don't think so. I don't think so, no. I mean, in terms of like the other ones, like in those days, there was no Photoshop, you know that. But, you know, he's basically just, and he was retouching the color. I don't think that he would have been able to add an alligator into the picture like that. But she's ready to play golf. You know?
It was very relaxed.
This is Hilton Head. That's the one of the golf courses in Hilton Head. Designed by George Cobb. So again, going back to the research part of it, there isn't a whole lot on Ernest Ferguson. I mean, I really kind of feel like I've discovered this artist. There isn't a whole lot on the internet about him. There's a video, about a 5-minute video produced by South Carolina Educational Television from the 90s maybe, of him giving a tour of his workroom with all of his cameras and everything. At this point he was a white-haired, you know, thin, patrician kind of Southern gentleman with a classic, you know, Southern accent. But there's nothing else. There's no, like, I haven't found articles on him. I mean, I really have to go back to Columbia, go down to Charleston, and really do like old school research, go through the archives of the Columbia Record, of the state newspaper, of the Post and Courier and so forth, to find articles. See if there was like an article about him, you know, in the 50s, 60s, or 70s.
When did he die?
I'm going to tell you that. I have been a little coy, I know, kind of like not giving you his personal information, kind of like leading up to it. But, so, we're there. I did find his obituary. He was born in 1924 in Richmond. He died in 2016 in Winsboro, so he lived to be 92 years old. There is a, so I also learned in his obituary that he was survived by his wife, Betty, classic 20th century girl's name, lady's name, Betty Ferguson. And there was a website for photo arts. There is a website for photo arts, but I mean, I went to it, but I figured it was just still up, but you know, people don't buy postcards anymore. People don't sell postcards anymore. And so I never really gave it a lot of thought. But last year, I went back to the website, there's a phone number on the website. And it lists on there that the president of the company now, for what that's worth, is a woman named Louise Deal, D-I-E-H-L. So I finally got up the nerve, the gumption, to call this number, right? So I call this number, a lady answers the phone, an elderly lady, I can hear that it's an elderly lady, and I said, you know, I identified myself, and I said, you know, I'd like to speak to Louise. She goes, do you want photo arts? And I was like, I guess I do. She goes, let me get you that number. So she goes away, she's fumbling around, and I'm thinking to myself, am I talking to Betty? You know, it's like, I couldn't believe it. And she came back and she gave me the number, and I said, thanks so much. I said, if you don't mind, I said, may I ask you what you can do? She goes, this is Betty, I'm Ernest Ferguson's wife. And I mean, I almost started crying.
Wow.
Literally almost started crying. I really felt like I was in a portal to the past. I assumed this woman was long gone, right? And here I'm talking to this woman in the picture.
said the alligator didn't eat her.
I mean, it was just incredible. She was
She's
so
missing a
gracious.
leg.
What's that?
She's missing.
She's missing.
a leg. She's missing a leg.
She was so gracious. She spoke to me for about 20 minutes. I told her I was an art historian studying her husband and how much I really admired her husband's work. And she made a point of telling me, I said, I know a gentleman's not supposed to ask, but do you mind if I should go? I don't mind, I'm 93. And she goes, she knew exactly what I was going to ask. She said, I'm just about to turn 93. This was last July. She turned 93 in September. And she made a point of letting me know that she still lives independently. Her daughter comes and visits her like once a week from Columbia. Winsboro, where they live, is about, I think it's about a half an hour above Columbia. But she made a point of letting me know that she still lives independently, still lives in their house, you know. And the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, she's talking on a landline, right? This was the old number, but it was just absolutely wonderful. So I asked her, I said, does your husband have a green beetle? She goes, no, he had a red microbus. A red VW microbus. So the beetle isn't his, and the microbus, the green microbus in Sumter, isn't his.
Huh?
But so then I said, there's a picture of the Charleston Museum, the woman leaning against a palmetto tree. She goes, that's me.
Oh, wow.
I said, what about Colonial Lake? She goes, I don't remember that one.
She probably got dragged around a lot.
I said, yeah, exactly. If it's Tuesday, right? I said, there's a picture of a woman, next to an alligator. She goes, that's not me. She goes, I don't know who that woman is. It sounds like a whole nother story, right? She goes, I don't know who that woman is. Like to this day, she's like, I don't know who that woman is. And there's this one. So recurring themes, right? Damsels in distress. This woman appears to be a little bit. What's that? This woman appears to be a little younger. So I was thinking, is that his daughter? Right? Maybe. And then there's this one.
Aww.
Right? Absolutely. And so before I kind of like did the math, put the dates together, I was thinking, is that his granddaughter? Yeah. The interesting thing about this card is that he gives the photo credit on this one to, can you see who the photo credit's for? Louise Ferguson. Photo by.
Photo of.
It does say photo of. It's funny the things you learn when you look closely at stuff. So, that's funny. I never noticed that. So, but anyway, I did the math, and I was like, the dates and everything. Born in 1924, so he's 40 in the mid 1960s. So this probably isn't his granddaughter. It's probably his daughter. So I asked Betty. I said, what about the girl in the cotton patch? And she goes, that's my daughter Louise. She was born in 1960. She's 4 in that picture. He also had a son, Ernest III, born in 1964, who's my age. The title of this one is White Gold of Dixie. Now, white gold of Dixie is what they call cotton because it made a fortune for the white landowners, slaveholders in the South. White gold of Dixie. But you have to kind of imagine that he's thinking that his daughter might be white gold of Dixie as well, right? So I called Louise on the phone that same Sunday afternoon. I left her a voice message and told her I just had the most delightful conversation with your mom. I'm studying your father, and I'd like to learn anything that you might be able to tell me. She did not call me back. While I've got you, I just want to let you know that this weekend actually is the 10th anniversary of the What is Art sign down on the Clock Tower building, which I'm quite proud of. Well, thank y'all so much.
Any other questions?
So that none of those cards are dated?
They're not.
They don't put dates
No,
or anything?
exactly.
Interesting.
You know, they didn't put dates on record albums either. I was like going through my record collection a couple of years ago, and I was like, oddly enough, more often than not, there's no date from like the 60s and 70s.
That's true.
You don't want to date something like that because for one reason, it's like you're not thinking about history.
Right.
You also don't want to date it because if it's sitting on the shelf for a few years, then
Right.
you don't want anybody to do that.
When do you need to get yourself down to this bad?
Yeah, you can.
You need to get it sooner rather than
That's
later.
true. That's
Yeah,
true.
I mean, I'm sorry, but I have a friend who was working on a biography, and we were in reception, we met a relative of the person she was working on, and the person said, well, I may have a few things. And we got ourselves to Baltimore, and she
Right.
had a
Yeah.
treasure trove, which if we had not known right away,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely
you
right.
know, I mean, if time's wasted,
That's right.
you get your butt down there.
Well, that's right. I do need to go, like I said, I need to do the research too. And she said that her daughter is working on archiving her stuff and donating it all to the Carolina Library.
You need all of that.
What's that?
You need all of that so you can finish your story.
So
You can contribute.
You can contribute.
Well, I think this is gonna be my contribution. I mean, I've been wondering how to, I've written an essay on the Starry Night and I did that lecture and everything. I was thinking about putting this one on my blog, but I finally figured out the best way to talk about my, research on Ferguson is through a video. So this is kind of like, I don't know. I was thinking this is kind of like where this one stops for a little while. But you're right, you're absolutely right. That's true.
If he was a native Virginian, have you found any postcards of Virginia that he did?
That's an excellent question. No. Well, you know what, I learned from her, she told me, I said he's from Virginia, right? I can't remember exactly what the details are, but his father died, I know that's right, when he was like, a teenager. And so his mother moved back to her hometown of Winsboro. He finished high school in Richmond, but then he moved back to Winsboro and spent the rest of his life in South Carolina. And 99% of his postcards are South Carolina. There's some of Georgia, Savannah, Augusta, but almost exclusively South. And interestingly enough, very few postcards of the upcountry, very few postcards of Greenville, Spartanburg, very few postcards, none really, of the Myrtle Beach area. There was another kind of postcard magnate in the Grand Strand area, and they evidently had some kind of gentleman's agreement for territory. But the Midlands, the Low Country, Hilton Head, Charleston, all that stuff, that was his bailiwick.
So did he do other kinds of photography? I mean, did he do weddings to support his trips into small towns?
That I don't know. I mean, it didn't mention anything on that in the obituary. Really just talking about his postcard business.
Oh, so that he did postcards.
Yeah,
That's his.
which is fascinating. Think about the economy is so different than it was now. To be able to own a house.
He must have taken thousands of
On
photographs.
postcards, totally. Thanks again, y'all. I love it. I had fun.